For millions of viewers in the 1970s, Demon Wilson was not just an actor on television. He was part of the weekly rhythm of home life. Every episode of Sanford and Son brought him into living rooms across the country, where laughter, familiarity, and routine blended effortlessly. Wilson's presence was steady and grounded, the perfect counterbalance to the chaos unfolding around him on screen. He wasn't playing for cheap laughs, he was anchoring them. At a time when television had the power to shape cultural memory, Wilson became a recognizable constant, someone audiences trusted. Fame arrived quickly and powerfully, but it never seemed to consume him. Even at the height of the show's success, there was a sense that Wilson viewed his work as part of life, not the entirety of it. That quiet perspective would later define the most surprising chapters of his journey. Becoming Lamont Sanford. When Sanford and Son premiered in 1972, Demon Wilson was only in his mid-20s, yet he carried himself with the calm authority of someone far older. Playing Lamont Sanford meant standing toe-to-toe with Red Fox, one of the most dominant comedic forces of the era. That was no small task. Fox's humor was loud, improvisational, and unpredictable, but Wilson never disappeared beside him. Instead, he grounded the show. Lamont was patient, responsible, often exhausted, and deeply human. Viewers recognized themselves in him. Wilson understood that Lamont wasn't meant to steal scenes, but to make them work. His restraint gave Fox's comedy space to soar while keeping the story emotionally believable. That balance turned the show into a cultural phenomenon, drawing tens of millions of viewers each week and cementing Wilson's place in television history. Success that came with weight. With success came expectations, and with expectations came pressure. Being part of one of the highest-rated shows on television meant visibility that never truly switched off. Demon Wilson was working constantly, appearing weekly in homes across America, carrying the responsibility of consistency in an industry that rarely slows down. While audiences saw laughter and chemistry, actors behind the scenes felt deadlines, long hours, and the quiet fear of being reduced to a single role. Wilson was grateful for the opportunity, but he was also thoughtful about its cost. He understood early that fame could be consuming if left unchecked. Unlike many performers who chase the next spotlight instinctively, Wilson paused to reflect. He didn't resent success, but he questioned whether it alone could provide fulfillment. That internal questioning, rarely visible to the public, would eventually lead him down a path few expected from a television star at the height of his popularity. Beyond a single role after Sanford and Son ended, Demon Wilson didn't vanish. He continued acting, taking on new television projects and film roles that allowed him to stretch beyond Lamont Sanford. While none matched the cultural reach of his breakout role, they demonstrated something important. Wilson was not defined by a single character. He worked steadily, experimenting with different formats and genres, proving his adaptability as a performer. Yet even as opportunities remained available, his relationship with Hollywood was changing. The industry's pace, priorities, and values increasingly felt misaligned with his own. Wilson was not chasing reinvention for relevance. He was seeking alignment with purpose. That distinction matters. Rather than clinging to visibility, he began exploring what life could look like outside constant performance. For many actors, stepping back feels like defeat. For Wilson, it became an intentional choice grounded in self-awareness rather than fear. A turn toward faith and meaning. Sometime after his peak television years, Demon Wilson experienced a deep spiritual shift that reshaped his understanding of success. He didn't speak about it as an escape, but as a realization. Despite professional recognition and financial stability, he felt something essential was missing. That sense of emptiness led him toward faith, reflection, and eventually ministry. Wilson didn't treat spirituality as a trend or a branding exercise. He committed fully, becoming an ordained minister and dedicating time to teaching, writing, and service. His books and sermons focused on purpose, discipline, and the dangers of mistaking visibility for value. He spoke candidly about how fame can distort priorities if left unexamined. This chapter of his life wasn't about rejecting entertainment, but about redefining fulfillment. He chose substance over applause and meaning over momentum, even when that choice confused outsiders. Walking away without regret? One of the most remarkable aspects of Demon Wilson's story is not that he stepped away from Hollywood, but that he did so without bitterness. He never framed his departure as an industry betrayal or a moral grandstand. Instead, he described it as a personal necessity. Opportunities still existed, yet he declined many of them, prioritizing alignment with his values over professional exposure. For nearly 2 decades, Wilson lived largely outside the entertainment spotlight, focusing on faith, family, and personal growth. In an industry driven by relevance and constant reinvention, that decision required quiet courage. He understood that being remembered was less important than living honestly. While others feared being forgotten, Wilson seemed at peace with stepping aside. His absence was not a disappearance, it was a deliberate pause. And that pause became one of the most defining statements of his life. A thoughtful return on his own terms. Years later, when Demon Wilson returned briefly to acting, it wasn't for nostalgia or validation. It was intentional. His later work reflected selectivity rather than ambition. He chose projects that resonated personally rather than professionally, signaling that his relationship with performance had matured. Acting was no longer his identity. It was simply one expression among many. This return reminded audiences that stepping away does not erase talent or relevance. It simply reframes them. Wilson approached this chapter without urgency, ego, or pressure. There was no attempt to reclaim former glory, only a willingness to contribute meaningfully when it felt right. That restraint stood in contrast to an industry that often equates longevity with constant presence. Wilson showed that legacy can be maintained through integrity rather than exposure, and that returning quietly can be just as powerful as never leaving at all. What his journey really represents. Demon Wilson's legacy is not limited to reruns or ratings. It lives in the example he set by choosing values over validation. He demonstrated that it is possible to achieve enormous success and still question its purpose. More importantly, he showed that walking away is not failure when it leads you closer to who you want to be. In a culture that celebrates constant visibility, Wilson modeled restraint. In an industry fueled by ego, he chose humility. His story resonates because it reflects a universal tension between ambition and meaning. Many people chase recognition believing it will bring fulfillment, only to discover it cannot replace purpose. Wilson's life reminds us that redefining success is an act of strength. His work continues to entertain, but his choices continue to teach. That combination is rare, and it ensures his influence extends far beyond the screen. A legacy that extends beyond applause. When people remember Demon Wilson, they will remember Lamont Sanford, the patient son who kept chaos in check. But those who look closer will see something deeper. They will see a man who understood that identity is larger than occupation, and that life's most important chapters often happen away from the spotlight. His journey encourages reflection rather than nostalgia. It asks us to consider what we value, what we chase, and what we are willing to release in order to live honestly. Wilson's story doesn't end with fame or fade with time. It continues in the conversations it sparks about purpose, balance, and courage. He didn't just entertain a generation, he challenged it, quietly and without spectacle. And that may be the most lasting role he ever played.